A wildlife photographer discovers an old World War II submarine buried deep in the jungle and calls the police right away. When experts finally examine what's inside, they become shocked and pale. James Mitchell expected this to be just another normal workday. He walked through the dense Amazon rainforest carrying his camera equipment, following a small stream where the sticky air stuck to everything around him. As he went further into the woods, something grabbed his attention. Something that didn't belong there. Through the heavy plants and tangled tree limbs, he could make out the outline of something large and metallic against the wild jungle backdrop. At first, he thought his mind was fooling him. Maybe just sunlight filtering through the leaves in an odd way. But as he moved closer, his pulse quickened. There, partly covered by jungle growth, was an enormous rusted submarine. It was trapped in mud and soil, with green moss and creeping plants covering its surface, and it appeared to have been there for decades and decades. The writing had worn away, but it was definitely a World War II submarine, sitting forgotten in the center of the rainforest, far from any sea or large river. James stood still, unable to trust what he was looking at. How could a submarine wind up in this spot? These were the only ideas running through his head as he gazed at the worn, rust-stained letters on the submarine's side. There was no logical way to make sense of this. His first instinct was to leave, to convince himself he was seeing things, but his interest pushed him forward. He raised his camera and began shooting photos, recording every side of this bizarre find. His hands trembled a bit as he circled the huge structure. Through his camera viewfinder, he caught details that only made the puzzle stranger. Odd symbols scratched into the metal, sections of the submarine that seemed too well maintained for something so ancient, and what appeared like someone had purposely tried to hide parts of the outer shell. Was this some lost piece from the war that got left here by mistake? Had someone moved it here intentionally, and why hadn't anyone discovered it until now? James reached into his pack and took out his satellite phone. His fingers shook as he called the local police station. He explained what he had just discovered in fast, gasping words. "You won't believe this," James said into the phone, "but I discovered a World War II submarine in the jungle." The officer on the other side sounded skeptical at first, but after hearing James Mitchell's account and viewing the pictures he emailed, they decided to send a crew to investigate. James Mitchell hung up the phone and sat down on a rock nearby, still staring at the massive submarine before him. The more he studied it, the more unusual it appeared. How could this huge ship have gotten so far into the jungle without anyone knowing? And what mysteries might it contain? Something felt unsettling about the entire scene, something that made him sense he wasn't by himself. At last, the far-off sound of motors cut through the quiet. The police had shown up. The group of investigators looked at the submarine once and knew this wasn't a normal discovery. One of the officers reached forward and tugged at the thick metal hatch. To their amazement, it swung open smoothly with a groaning noise, as if someone had been maintaining it. When they entered, the investigators were right away amazed by how well kept everything appeared. Ancient control boards covered the walls with gauges and buttons that seemed too spotless for something supposedly left behind since World War II. Some sections showed wear and damage, but other areas looked untouched by age. The crew glanced at each other anxiously. How could the interior of a submarine abandoned in the jungle for decades still be in such fine shape? One of the officers moved his hand across a control board, wiping away the grime to uncover what appeared to be newer parts connected to the old equipment. "These shouldn't be here," he said softly to himself. Inside the main crew sleeping quarters, they discovered a collection of personal belongings that made the puzzle even stranger. But it was the newer items that created the biggest concerns. A stainless steel water container that appeared brand new sat beside old military gear, and a flashlight that still functioned was hidden under a bunk. It wasn't just that these objects seemed wrong. They had no business being there at all. Nothing in the historical files of World War II submarines showed they carried things like these. The further they explored, the more they understood that this submarine was not a typical piece of history. One of the scientists saw that some of the electrical wires going through the walls seemed to have been switched out with circuits that appeared like after-war technology. "Someone's been here," he whispered, "and not long ago." Dr. Robert Blake, a historian who specialized in wartime codes, matched the symbols with World War II files. "These symbols aren't accidental marks," he explained to the team. "This submarine was part of an undocumented mission." The room became silent. The historians, code specialists, and scientists all looked toward Dr. Blake, who kept explaining that the symbols showed a top-secret operation, one that wasn't in any official files. His finding made everything more grave. This wasn't just a forgotten piece from the war. It was something much more significant, something that had been deliberately concealed. Then, one of the officers shouted from a corner of the crew sleeping quarters. "You should look at this," he said, holding up a leather-bound journal. It was faded and the corners were damaged, but it was still remarkably whole. They crowded around as he turned to the first page. It appeared to have belonged to a Lieutenant Mark Stevens, a crew member of the submarine. The entries were dated near the end of the war in the summer of 1945. The sailor had carefully written down the daily activities, the stress among the crew, and their growing sense of unease. But as they turned through the pages, they discovered something much more troubling. One entry, dated just before the war's final days, told of a secret mission. The crew had received direct commands to carry an unknown cargo locked in a heavy box. The mission wasn't recorded anywhere, completely unofficial, and the crew was told never to discuss it even with each other. The diary went on to show that they had been warned repeatedly never to open the box under any conditions. The team looked at one another. What could have been in that box so risky or valuable that it needed this much secrecy? As they kept reading, the worry increased. The journal suggested the crew's growing fear. Lieutenant Stevens wrote about how some of the crew members had started to behave oddly. He described sleepless nights, the feeling that the mission was doomed, that they were carrying something much more dangerous than they had been informed. Then the entry ended abruptly. The final page was left incomplete, as if the writer had been stopped while writing. "We're approaching the drop location," it said. "The captain says," and then nothing. They stared at each other. The submarine wasn't just left behind. Something had gone horribly wrong, and the crew had never returned to give their report. But then came the most terrifying find of all. As Dr. Blake kept studying the symbols and comparing them with historical information, he spotted something even more unusual. "This submarine didn't finish its trip in the 1940s, he said quietly, his face turning white as he traced his finger along a part of the hull. The room went completely quiet. "It was relocated probably decades afterward," he continued, pointing to proof that showed signs of after-war changes, including modern wiring and current parts. It might have been used for something completely different after the war. This ship's story didn't finish when World War II ended. Meanwhile, one of the investigators at the scene had sent satellite photos back to his headquarters for study. If they could figure out when the submarine reached the jungle, it might give them a hint about who had brought it there. Hours later, the satellite photos returned. What they showed made everything even more serious. The submarine hadn't been in the jungle since the 1940s, as they had first believed. The satellite information showed that the submarine had only been moved to its present spot in the early 1980s, decades after World War II had finished. This discovery completely shattered their earlier understanding. Someone had transported this enormous vessel and buried it deep in the jungle. "What the hell is happening?" one of the officers mumbled. Ideas flew around among the group. No one knew exactly what the submarine had been used for, but one thing was certain. Its location in the jungle was no coincidence. It had been hidden intentionally, and the modern equipment found inside was a hint that whatever the operation had been, it had involved powers far beyond their knowledge. The feeling of fear grew as they realized they were no longer looking into a piece of history. They were examining and trying to understand a vessel connected to dangerous, mysterious events that had lasted decades. Could the submarine have been used for espionage? Did it carry secret information or even advanced equipment? Or was there something much more dangerous on board? Something that, if found, could change everything. Evidence from the submarine's interior led them deeper into the jungle. After hours of searching, they found something that would alter the direction of their investigation. An abandoned military facility covered with thick vines and mostly hidden by the dense forest. The facility looked deserted, but the crumbling buildings and faded symbols were unmistakable. This place had once been a hub of military operations. The team moved forward carefully. The abandoned complex had rusted fences and collapsed structures covered with vines. Some walls showed faded Cold War symbols, confirming their suspicions that the submarine and facility were linked to a secret operation. Inside one of the main buildings, they made a series of startling discoveries. Old file cabinets, once locked tight, had been broken open. Papers and documents were spread across the floor. As the investigators looked through the mess, they found records and blueprints. Blueprints that described not only the submarine, but also changes that had been made to it during the 1980s. The markings on the blueprints matched the strange symbols they had seen carved inside the submarine. This facility was used to modify the submarine, one of the scientists said. "Look at this. They installed advanced parts, technology that didn't exist during World War II. It became more and more obvious that the submarine had been part of a classified Cold War operation, one that had never been officially recorded." Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. While they kept looking around the base, they discovered equipment and documents that didn't belong in the place they were supposed to be from. Fancy communication gear, plans for weapons, and mysterious unmarked containers filled with what looked like early computer prototypes, all way too advanced for that time period. The big surprise came when they dug up another detailed journal hidden beneath a pile of rubble. It was written in secret code, but one thing was obvious. It talked about classified cargo that had been carried on the submarine. The information about the cargo was unclear, but the records proved that the submarine had been given the job of moving it to a safe place, and the mission had been wrapped in secrecy with only a few people knowing what it was really about. The base had been left empty, the submarine hidden away, and its crew wiped from the history books. But why? When they got back to the submarine with the plans and a good understanding of how the submarine's inside had been changed, the team knew exactly where to search. Based on the plans, a secret compartment at the bottom of the ship had been sealed shut and purposely hidden from anyone who didn't know where it was. It took the team several minutes to locate it and remove the rusty bolts and seals. Inside sat a single metal object. It was big, rectangular, and covered in what looked like a network of wires and odd parts. It was shiny and perfect, with no signs of aging or damage, as if it had been put there just yesterday. "What is this thing?" one of the officers whispered. Dr. Harrison, one of the main scientists, moved closer. He looked at the object more carefully, his fingers moving along the metal's edge. Then something made sense to him. He jumped back all of a sudden. "I've seen this before," he said. Dr. Harrison paused. "This is part of a project connected to advanced energy research. There were tests done during the war, top-secret work involving energy control, something related to early nuclear energy theories, but much more experimental. Most of the paperwork was destroyed after the war, but I've read about it in classified files." The team crowded around the object. Dr. Harrison looked at it again. This wasn't just something old from the past, it was something much more dangerous. But they had no other option. They had to find out what was inside. One of the engineers started taking apart the outer shell. As the layers came off, the center of the object was revealed. In the middle was a round container with symbols that made Dr. Harrison's spine tingle with fear. "These symbols," he whispered, "are connected to early nuclear research, but this isn't just any reactor or power source. This might be a prototype for something much more powerful." Dr. Harrison bent in closer. His face went white and he struggled to breathe. "This is a weapon," he said. "If this had been turned on, it could have changed the path of history." Everyone stopped moving. The object wasn't just some experimental energy project. It was a prototype for a weapon that could have brought destruction on a level never seen before. It had been hidden inside the submarine for decades, forgotten by time. But why? One of the officers remembered the journal they had found earlier. The incomplete entries from Lieutenant Stevens had suggested that something was terribly wrong with the mission. They got the journal and started looking through the last few pages, and then they found it. The final entry was short, quickly written in shaky handwriting. Lieutenant Stevens had written about the growing stress on the submarine as they got close to their final destination. The crew had been told to bury the object in the jungle, far from any people, knowing that if it got into the wrong hands, it could cause terrible disasters. But the entry ended with a scary warning. "They're coming for us. We were never supposed to return. They don't want this technology getting to enemy hands. We've been betrayed." The team stared at the words. The truth hit them like a heavy weight. The submarine's crew had been targeted by an organization, probably connected to a government or spy agency, someone who wanted to keep this technology hidden no matter what. The crew had never made it back because they were never meant to. They had been silenced, and their mission had been buried along with the deadly cargo. The discovery of the abandoned World War II submarine, the secret military base, and the advanced technology hidden inside left the team of scientists and authorities in shocked silence. They had found something far more dangerous than they had ever expected. Technology that was ahead of its time, a weapon that could have changed the course of history, and a mission covered in secrecy and betrayal. They now faced an impossible choice: what to do with their new knowledge and the dangerous object they had found. If news of the discovery reached the wrong people, the results could be terrible. As they packed up their gear and got ready to leave the jungle, they knew that this discovery would stay hidden from the public. The submarine, the base, and the weapon would remain a dark, forgotten part of history, known only to those who had found it. Did you like this story? If you found a mysterious submarine in the jungle, would you explore it by yourself or ask for help? Let us know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Remember, it's often smarter to ask for help. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.